But do the intro again.
Okay, welcome to Film Trace. This is a podcast where we trace the life of a film from conception to production all the way to release and reception. We have a special guest, if you can hear in the background, folks. It is Molly. She is back. This is your, fifth time? Fourth time?
I don't know.
What was the last movie you did? The Chicago, Trial Chicago something? Okay.
I did something after that. Times of
Donnie Darko.
You did Donnie Darko.
Oh yeah. We really alienated a lot of people with that one. Probably that got real long.
Yeah, that was a good one. That was a good episode. We are back. You are back to talk about. I believe this is your. How would you describe your relationships with erotic thrillers? Let's start with that.
I just really enjoy them. It's one of my favorite subgenres. So, as I said before, let's see how many times I can say erotic in this episode and make people uncomfortable.
It's tricky though when it's audio because it often comes across as neurotic.
Right. Well, I'll just be sure to overemphasize when I say it and linger on the word. So, yeah.
It is. What do we got? Episode 4 of season 5. We are doing an anniversary film. I guess, did I pick this, right? I picked this, didn't I, Chris?
Yeah. So I'm curious. It seemed like a left field choice for you, Dan, though it is not only an erotic thriller, it's also a neo-noir, and I know that's in your wheelhouse.
Yeah.
So tell me what about it. This is Lawrence Kasdan's Body Heat. 40th anniversary, came out back in 1981.
Yeah, so 40 years. I've never seen it before. So I chose it because I think, Molly, you mentioned it as a movie that I should see, I believe.
It was probably scrolling through. You were probably calling an audible on a movie night. We were scrolling through HBO Max, which it's streaming on, and I probably was mentioned, and you had said you hadn't seen it.
Yeah, and so it's one of those movies that I've heard about a lot, but had never seen before. So I was like, I love noir films. Erotic thrillers, not my subgenre of choice, to be honest with you. I can't remember the last time I saw Fatal Attraction or Basic Instinct. I don't even know if I've seen them in full. So I thought, let's
in
dive
this
into
community, we don't only acknowledge thrillers with Michael Douglas in them. So I guess I'll just point that out. That list is. I get that he's sort of a weird for a small period of time. He was weirdly had this like very intense run of like erotic thrillers, like Fatal Attraction, Basic Instinct. Disclosure, which nobody probably remembers, with Demi Moore and him, where she's like a female boss who sexually harasses him. Very strange. But yeah, there was like a weird time, I guess, like Perfect Murder too. Like that was his thing. He was to erotic thrillers as Meg Ryan was to romantic comedies in the 90s.
So give me your top 3 non-Michael Douglas erotic thrillers.
That's a tough.
Yeah. I mean, we go for the ladies. So Bound, Last Seduction, anything by Adrian Lind. Let's call Flashdance an erotic thriller too. Just lump all of There's
Would we call Body Heat like the first massively successful erotic thriller?
I think some of De Palma's stuff might have been earlier. I don't remember though.
Yeah, I guess Blowout, would you count that? It's not really. I mean, Body Double.
That's like the same year. But
yeah,
really? I think the 80s is kind of where it really hit. I mean, De Palma was definitely doing the thriller genre in the late 70s. I guess Dressed to Kill is 1980, but I wouldn't necessarily call that movie erotic, especially since, it's problematic looking back. I don't know.
Dressed to Kill, I'm sorry, Body Double came out in 1984. So this is 3 years before that.
Yeah. Blowout was 81 though.
Blowout was like more political thriller, right?
Yeah. The Fury was 78, but that's still like straight like psychological thriller. I don't know. I think that's kind of been the canonical agreement that Body Heat birthed the genre, though, at least in my initial research.
That way. Like, it seems like there hasn't been. I mean, sure, there's always like proto examples of these films, but nothing that this successful that landed this large,
right?
In this sort of public consciousness. And so, what is Body Heat about? Should we do the tagline? It's a hot summer. Ned Racine is waiting for something to happen, and when it does, he won't be ready for the consequences.
Can we just talk about the name Ned Racine for a minute?
Is it Racine or Racine? Because in Wisconsin we say Racine, right?
There's a city called Racine. But I tried to pay specific attention in my rewatch that I believe in every instance the characters name him or pronounce his name Racine.
Yeah, Racine. That's like maybe like a southern thing. I don't know.
It's a Florida thing. Yeah.
Yeah. So it takes place in Florida. Ned Racine's like a small town. I heard him listed as a shyster, but that does not seem appropriate.
Listed where in the movie?
No, it's one of the plot points, or it's one of the synopsis. And I was like, no, he's not really a shyster.
Because a shyster.
Yeah, I don't think we should be using that word at all.
We're not cleared for that, sir.
Gotcha. I just don't think that that's really what he is.
He's just, I don't know. Honestly, I feel like I don't know if like the ambulance chaser term, and I don't even think he's that. I think he's just kind of supposed to be dumb. Like, I don't think he's supposed to be a particular. I never took his character as, whatever, like a specific, like I think you can, like, oh, it's this type of lawyer, or like class, a certain, like I feel like his whole thing is just, but like he's, what's the word I'm looking for? It's not dupe. He's what's the patsy? I don't know. Whatever the term I'm looking for is that I can't figure out. I mean, like, he's just supposed to kind of be, he's just kind of dumb, straight up, I think is what he's supposed to be. He's identified by multiple characters as easily like dupable and like not very good at his job.
Yeah. And he doesn't like his job. He doesn't have any passion for it.
Yeah. He's just,
he kind of goes through the motions, plays a little fast and loose. Clearly he's amoral, since he basically just says, hey, let's murder somebody. But let's get back to the plot. What does this lawyer do, Dan?
Also, shyster is not anti-Semitic, if you guys are thinking that.
No, not necessarily. I'm just thinking like it's no. I just, oh my God, I love that you. This is everyone's. I feel like in my episodes, they always get a real window into these friendships. Like, you're just like, instead of listening to us talking about the movie, you're like off Googling some random thing. Like,
according to the etymology.
I'm on Merriam-Webster.
I mean, it's a Yiddish term, correct?
It's Yiddish, but there's nothing anti-Semitic about the word shyster.
Okay, first of all, no one said anti-Semitic. I guess just clear. I guess we were just flagging it as like
both of your reactions to the word shyster. Let's do it.
I mean, I just felt I don't know the history of word, but since I try not to use Yiddish terms, since I am not Yiddish myself and don't know much about Yiddish terms.
Gotcha. Okay. Interesting. So he's a small town shyster. And the whole point of that is he's not a shyster because it's not what he is.
I got it.
I mean, okay, whatever. He's unscrupulous. Yes.
We already got it. He's sure unscrupulous. Like, I like my description. He's dumb. Like, he's dumb and he's just like doesn't care. Yeah, I would say more like I think that's how he's supposed to read. He's not
at his
like
job.
Yeah, like I don't really think we actually get I don't really know him that well, right? Like you don't really like intense. Like, we don't get like a deep dive into his background or like how he got where he is.
This is not a character study. No,
that's what I'm saying. Of like, I think like, yes, he is you read, and that's part of the fun of the tying it back to this genre, like neo noir or erotic thrillers or whatever. You know what I mean? Those like genre type movies is because you like the characters are sketched enough. I think like the good ones where you're like, oh, this hits sort of these like marks, or I know how I'm supposed to read or interpret that, or what kind of archetype they're playing. But it gives it enough layering. Like I think he's well drawn. Like I think William Hurt, you're like, I don't think he's like I don't want to
cut out, right?
Yeah, like I think like he's like, I actually think he's like a compelling character. I'm just saying like, yes, we don't get a deep dive into like his thoughts on like the law profession per se, or like why he, I think what I'm saying is he's supposed to read as kind of dumb and whatever.
There's not a lot going on in there.
Yeah, and that's fine.
Mm-hmm. So did we talk about what actually happens in this movie?
No,
we're sidetracked. My apologies. So this lawyer essentially meets this beautiful lady, Maddie Walker, who is played by Kathleen Turner, and it's her film debut. Mm-hmm. This is her first film ever.
Wow! Right?
Yeah, and she couldn't even get. There's like some notes on the There's some notes on the sort of like a casting of this, or she wanted to get an audition. She couldn't even get an audition because she had no film credits. Right. And it's only after they couldn't really cast for this role that they went back to her. And I think she was in the right town at the right moment. And it just worked. So Ned meets Maddie. An affair commences. Essentially, it's the plot of Double Indemnity, right? They plot to murder her rich husband, to take the money. And then, of course, things do not work out as they seem or want to. So it's a very classic boilerplate noir plot that's been around for 40 years at this point, 50 years. But that's not really what makes the movie pop. I think the first thing you'll notice if you've seen a lot of noir films is that there's a lot of sex in this, which is not the case in most traditional noirs. All those had production codes, right? You couldn't say certain things about sex. You certainly could not show sex on screen. And this was just the complete sort of opposite of that, which I think is one of the reasons why it made such a big splash when it came out. It was erotic. So it was a very sort of different sort of take.
And I think that's important, right? That there's maybe like only a few seconds total of actual sex, but there's a lot of sexiness. There's a lot of erotic moments and sweaty bodies, right?
God, I love talking about erotic things with this group.
Me too.
It's palpable, and like you guys don't like take any. You just, it's just really, you can feel the eroticism with how you talk about it. What's important here is there's 2.7 exact minutes of screen time with erotic content, and.
But I mean, this is not the weird thing about that too, is like, this is probably not the most sexually explicit mainstream film, right? Like what's the bigger ones I'm thinking of, like in the 70s? No takers.
I mean, like, in what capacity are you talking about? Like
NC-17 ish.
I mean, but I see what I like about, I think most of the ones that were, I would argue, actually like pretty gross, like Straw Dogs, Last Tango in Paris, like actually like really like there's nothing erotic about any of those movies, even if they're supposed to be, because they're actually like really kind of like a little bit like disgusting depictions of sex sometimes. I mean, like explicit, right? Like explicitly like sexual assault, or just like Last Tango in Paris is super gross. But like that's part of the, I feel like and again, the appeal of a movie like this and like erotic thrillers in general is like you get it's like they create an immersive quality, right? Like I feel like there's always like the Femme. I mean, I can keep going, but I also realized, do you want to get through the plot summary? I didn't realize, did we? Did we get through the plot summary? Did we get through the Byzantine like legal code that really like weirdly has like a like a weird whatever it is, like perpetual property law or whatever is in like the weird
which goes back to how he's so terrible at his job, right?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Should we dive in? Let's call in a lawyer on that one.
Yeah, legal. No,
yeah, let's like call in. We don't know any lawyers. But I was saying like, so for me, it's like, you know, what's the difference for me between like an erotic thriller, like whatever, which I feel like is, they're typically also neo-noirs kind of, like it's like a very sort of specific kind of thriller element. And I feel like, you know, the difference is like there's the femme fatale archetype, right? But a lot of times it's it's not explicit, and I don't even mean with like showing sex on screen. It's not explicitly that the sort of danger or draw is just generally like dangerous woman, right? With like an erotic thriller, and like in this movie, it is like the thrill for us as the audience, if it, you know, these characters appeal to you and their attraction appeals to you, it's like the thrill is like being immersed in this like equal parts you know, suspense of the mystery, but also like the edge of your seat, like, oh, it's this fantasy of like you were caught up in being so fucking horny, like, you know, in like this very dangerous way where it's like, I'm gonna risk it all, you know what I mean? Like, I'm risking it all. I know this is gonna end poorly, and I know I'm gonna, and then I just keep making poor decisions, you know, or like I keep making more dangerous decisions. And like, so part of the suspense is like not only what those characters typically do, but it's like wrapped up in this like, you know, this erotic sort of really, you know, it's a fantasy element, right? For most people is like this, like you get trapped in this whole thing because there's this attraction and eroticism that you like stumble upon that's so strong addiction, that it makes you do things you didn't even imagine, right?
Yeah. Like he says that even too, like after the Will stuff goes down, the police detective and his friend Ted Danson, which I believe, I don't know if this is his film debut, but I think it's one of his biggest initial roles before Cheers.
Yeah, it's his second big screen role after The Onion Fields, which was also a neo-noir, which is kind of strange because he was mostly just doing,
they even
comedy.
warned him about, you know, sticking around or, you know, heading over to her house, hanging out with her, and he goes, well, maybe she'll fuck me to death. And it's like, it's so clearly stated like the thesis of the film. I mean, the thing that blew me away, because I hadn't seen it before, is that initial scene where they go back to her mansion.
Never looking at wind chimes the same.
Yeah. And it's like
so many wind chimes.
And then he throws the chair through the window. Like,
oof,
that's
just right.
Like,
that's ooh.
And she's like, that, I mean, yeah, that was like,
that is like, it's not, like, oof, that's, I mean, that's a pretty, that's like
there's a lot of layers to that too. It's like, just like, get out of here.
Let's talk about, did it stir some things in you? Let's get into it. It's not
well, I mean, it's almost like there's an element to it of like the home invasion part of that is really odd. Like, why would that?
Right, like,
no.
Okay,
no, I mean, like, that's a funny. No, I mean, maybe. I think that's funny that
he throws the door through the window.
Yeah, but again, this is what I'm talking about. When executed properly, like, you know, like, and that's what I'm saying. Maybe this doesn't work for you, but when like erotic stuff is like, and this like erotic like when this is executed properly, it's like it's slightly, but everything about a noir, right, is over the top in a certain way, even if it's not, right? You know what I mean? It's like there's an element of, in order to have a neo-noir genre, there's like an element of structure, right? Artifice, over the topness, you know, in the sense of it's like a slightly heightened reality. That's sort of how you get, you know, genre in a way. Right. And so I feel like the same goes here, where it's like that it's the execution of a fantasy. And I don't mean like because I don't think that's how this plays, like a violent sort of erotic home invasion. He's not there. She's like standing there. Why it works is because she is watching him through that window, being like, God, I hope you smash this window because I want to have sex with you so fucking bad. Yeah, that's like, that is like, she's looking at him the way that it's directed. Like, she's looking at him like, please throw, she's like begging him, like, again, it's a fantastical erotic moment. Do you know what I'm saying? Like,
show me how bad you want me.
And like, just, absolutely do this. Break through the window. I asked you to leave, but don't leave. Come back and break through the window. I did want me on the floor.
I did want just they have these kind of interesting interstitial scenes, like mini montages throughout the film, where it's just like a few seconds of William Hurt like smoking and looking at the camera in bed to transition between scenes. And so I was hoping that this housekeeper that they keep talking about that we never see like just a few seconds of her just like shaking her head and sweeping up the glass or something. It seems
okay. That's a weird thing to. Right.
Because I think that one aspect of the film that I do get where that interpretation comes from, Dan, because especially when you pair it with your other observation about his comment about getting fucked to death, it seems like there is like that's one of the reasons that the movie works so well in like trying to be more than just, you know, people having an affair, more than just like, you know, kind of the code era romance that leads to planning the husband's death, like in Billy Wilder, the Double Indemnity, right?
Yeah.
So like there is this kind of like new 80s edge to it that's brought to the mainstream, and it's interesting because this was ostensibly a pretty small, or at least like a moderately budgeted movie, 9 million.
Yeah, it wasn't
right?
huge because it was at 20th Century Fox,
right?
When I think his name was Ladd, who ended up leaving, and then they somehow Kasdan got it removed from 20th Century Fox and went to this guy who was the champion of the film for like $9 million production budget, which is not small per se, not like an indie film or anything like that back then, but like not huge,
especially for the guy. Like it's his debut, but like he had just written two of the biggest movies of all time, Empire Strikes Back and Raiders of the Lost Ark, right? And
yeah,
so
I mean, I don't think this is an easy sell.
No matter who you are.
Yeah.
And he got $250K from George Lucas himself to help with any budget.
He had to vouch for him as well.
Yeah. So like there's something going on here where it's like Kasdan and everybody else involved that's like supporting the idea of this film. It's clear that like he's really trying to like push the boundary without really going over, right? Like he would never do like a Peck and Paw Straw Dogs kind of thing, or even a Last Tango in Paris type thing, to go back to what you were kind of referencing, what was going on in the 70s that was definitely not like fun to watch, right? But disturbing and kind of gross. So like it's really interesting how they are able to straddle that line between discomfort and just straight up like enjoyable hardcore romance kind of thing.
Yeah. I mean, do we feel like this is like would you call this a guilty pleasure movie? Molly, this one's directed at you. Would you call it a guilty pleasure?
No.
Or would you call it like,
I mean, again, I feel like that's a larger conversation. Like I feel like I don't even subscribe to like the guilty pleasure. I mean, because I've personally, I don't mean that in like I'm enlightened. Like for me, I'm kind of like, oh, I no longer have utility for myself in terms of guilty pleasure. I can understand that there's different reasons why I find, you know, certain TV or movie content pleasurable, where I can objectively be like, yeah, I know this is kind of trash, or like not objectively good writing, or like this and that, or I can't really explain why I like it, right? But I just know I like it, and I, you know, whatever. I can understand there's different qualitative reasons why I am drawn to something. So I don't really think there's anything. I don't really understand. I'd be curious, like why you asked that question. Like what makes you think this would be a guilty pleasure over a different noir movie?
Well, I think essentially we just talked about it being very over the top. Right,
but I feel like everything's over the top. That's what I'm saying. The genre.
But I think that's the question for me. It's sort of like if I look at something like Night Moves, or like that's not super over the top, right? It's
but I don't think this movie is super over the top. I wouldn't. That it doesn't read like that to me.
There's moments
of it that feel like, especially the chance through the door felt very over the top.
And I will say the one time in which I actually like laughed out loud, and I didn't remember this from while I was doing my rewatch. I had watched this movie like in a fever dream while I was sick one day, like 8 or 10 years ago. And so I didn't remember much about it. So, but during my rewatch, I was just like, I got like some of those clues, such as the chair through the window moment. But the moment that really got me like wondering, like, how how self-aware is this movie?
Yeah, well, that's the question I'm really asking.
Right, like when William Hurt walks up to the gazebo thinking it's Kathleen Turner, and it turns out to be her friend or whatever.
Well, the
and
person who she still did, yeah.
Yeah, hey lady, want to fuck? Yeah. Like that's it's funny, right? It's funny.
Well,
is it supposed to be?
I'm like, is it?
You guys are killing me.
Is there an element of like parody going on here?
Like,
I mean, because it is noir by the book, right? The plot. It's a plot that's been used, several times before. So that's not super innovative or kind of new or whatever. And he does sort of write it in a very sort of traditional noir-y way. The added elements here are the sexual elements that are explicit. And I think it's sort of the erotica is kind of the point in a lot of the scenes, which would not be the case in a traditional noir. Is it an homage? Is it like a wink at noir and he's trying to do something new? Or is it, parody, pastiche? Does it matter?
This man wants a category.
Well, I think that's one of the reasons why with the film, I sort of struggle with it, enjoying it. It's sort of like, from a noir perspective, it doesn't really do anything all that interesting to me. From the plot perspective, it's, by the numbers, essentially. The biggest changes outside of the sexuality is the fact that she gets away with it, which is, a pretty big change from the traditional sort of equation. Usually the femme fatale has to pay for their sort of, moral indiscretions. And so, I mean, that's the thing. It's like, if it's an homage, it's like, oh yeah, like it's a pretty good, or really good, and like crafted very well and acted superbly.
And that's where I think the pleasure comes from, is that it's done so skillfully that it's not just
it's a deftness to it.
Right. It's not just repackaging. It's clearly like they wanted to be careful about how to make those moments hit, how to make the turns in the dialogue clever. But then there's those moments like, hey lady, wanna fuck? Like, what I'm curious, Molly, what do you think is going on in those kinds of moments? Another one that comes to mind is like when the Ted Danson character and J.A. Preston's character, the two friends, kind of like have him cornered at his apartment when he comes back, and just like some of those little moments where it's just like, wow, William Hurt, you're dumb as hell. And like, are we supposed to, like, how? I can't tell if that's an attempt to be kind of subtle, or is that an attempt to really kind of accentuate how silly and comical these kinds of over the top situations are, even down to like how just how glistening this man's chest is when there clearly should be some kind of fan on in the room.
So many things to address here. First of all, have you ever lived in the South in the summers? Like, actually, the sweat feels very accurate to me, and the lack of air conditioning in 1981. Like,
Yes.
The dead of Florida in the summer in 1981, you best believe that. And again, part of that is, but that's also like a classic trope too, where it's just like the heat makes you do crazy things you wouldn't normally do. Right? So it's supposed to be, it's this really weird, bewitching 3 weeks of extra hot weather, even hotter than our normal craziest hot summers down here, right? So that it's like that's supposed to be a character that's pretty common. Like that doesn't read as weird to me, or comical in a way. Like it's supposed to be heightened, because that's the whole thing about these, again, which makes it fun and entertaining, is watching somebody, watching characters where you're like, and again, I think it's if you go, and you guys kind of like try to like suck the fun out of stuff, but like if you go like Jesus, not everything has to be clinical. Like you go into a movie like this, again, I would assume this is how like I would approach noir. Otherwise, I don't know how you get enjoyment out of you. You might clock, right, who a character is supposed to be, but you go into a movie like Body Heat for the first time, you don't necessarily know quite where it's going to go. You might be like, oh yeah, Kathleen Turner is probably like I don't know how this is going to end well, right? But it could also be like, yeah, maybe she gets killed or this or that. Like there could be some other way that this could play out. You just know that's where the suspense comes from. You just know it's not going to end well. And so you're like going down and you're like, I can't turn away. I can't watch. And I don't know. So for me, it feels very spot on for also like an 80s vibe too.
Yeah.
Like I think that's, you guys are like, oh, it doesn't match this, that, but like to me it reads like, I'm like, yeah, this feels like so located, like in a good way that doesn't feel wrong. A 1981 neo-noir. Like there's nothing about it to me that feels out of place when it was for the time it was made. And also the humor too. I mean, I don't think Lawrence Kasdan did not have a history of writing things that had humor elements in it, so I read that moment with William Hurt. I don't know if you guys have ever hung out with like men who are idiots. That sounds exactly like something a man would say and think it's funny. Right?
Yeah. No, that's true. Yeah.
Like like that's funny too, because you're like, who, what? I'm like, no, that sounds that it sounds like, yeah, he thought that was funny. Like when he thought it was her, he was like, that was like, hey baby, wanna fuck? Like he thought that was funny.
Yeah.
And that feels very like something his character would say. And then he looks like a dumb idiot because he said that to a stranger. But yeah, that doesn't, it's supposed to be humorous in the sense like this guy's kind of an idiot,
Do you
sometimes.
think that like Kasdan is like commenting on the genre there at all? Or is he just trying to write an entertaining melodrama?
I think he's just trying to make a good movie. I don't know. Yeah. I feel like that's, if I like think of what kind of movies he makes, he's just trying to make, I don't think he's trying to make anything like super subversive. I think he was trying to make a movie that was really, really entertaining.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I thought he did a good job.
And it's interesting. This is technically, not technically, like his best movie he's ever made was his first movie, right? Is that a stretch or no? Big Chill came after this, which I think people like, but probably does not have the stature of this film. I don't know what you guys think.
There's those French kiss aficionados in here, but yeah. I think he's a pretty straightforward. The movies that he writes, or again, especially the movies that he wrote prior to this too, like, so I don't know. Yeah, the sort of moments of comedy are like, I really loved, like, and I even say comedy that felt, it didn't feel out of place for me, at least, like in the, like it felt like, yeah, because real life there's people and conversations that happen even in this weird nature of this world where there's, especially with two guys where they're like, you idiot, what are you doing? Or like the Ted Danson or whatever. Like, oh my God, I loved the scene. And it totally fits with Ted Danson's character, like the vibe or some of those certain scenes. Like after they all meet for like the first will reading thing. And then he's talking to Maddie outside the country. She's like, I know you're mad at me or whatever. I need you, come to the house. And then Ted Danson's like in the background. I don't know if you guys caught this. He's in the background of the parking lot dancing and like dancing on the cars and just like being a goofball. Yeah. So I say all that of like, to me, that's a cue that I would take as like, he's not having Ted Danson do that because he's making some commentary or whatever too. He's incorporating natural levity or humor or characters that have that as part of their personality, because you don't have that. Like the humor that comes from William Hurt's character comes from him being a fucking idiot.
Yeah.
Like that moment of wanna fuck, like that. I think that is supposed to be funny in the sense of like, he's kind of an idiot. So like, look, he embarrassed himself.
Well, it's interesting because like there's that scene where Ted Danson is dancing on the dock.
Right.
Doing like the Fred Astaire thing. And then he basically implies that he knows that he's involved, Ned's involved in some sort of the murder, essentially, right? So it's a weird sort of juxtaposition between this super playfulness and sort of, hey, yeah, I know you're a murderer. Like, what are you going to do about it, essentially? I don't know. I think, yeah, it's, I don't know. Where would you guys put this in other sort of erotic thrillers? Molly, where would you rank this? Is this top?
I'd always have to rank everything. Just like
it sounds like you like it. Do you like it more or less?
Aggressive ranking. What? Do I like it more? No, like it's not.
Black Seduction. That's a great one. Peter Berg.
Yeah. I think, yeah, it's fun. I think you get a little bit, the first time you watch something like this is always the most fun. You know, that's what, like, you know, I mean, I think with any movie that has sort of the twists of like when you go in, I don't know, like, I like, and the best erotic thrillers, it just like offers you this other like more intensive layer of like an immersive environment is, I feel like, the appeal, where it's just like you're like, I'm just like in this sweaty soup of like, you know, whatever, like, and it adds this layer where you like can just like be fully in if you want to just, I don't know, like go like indulge in that fantasy. But yeah, I mean, so I think, yeah, and especially like the first time you watch it, because if you allow yourself, I mean, this, you could argue this with like any like thriller movie, but I feel like, again, if you go full in, there's just like an extra, because that's the whole point of why, like, again, the erotic part is it adds like, there's nothing more, if you fully lean into it, there's like nothing more like out of control than the idea or the fantasy of like fully giving yourself over to just being like, you know, this wild sort of unexpected sexual that I'm literally letting knowingly ruin my life. Like, not even before he's plotting murder, he's kind of just like, whoops, like letting it just totally take over his life and be like, what would happen if I just like fully decided not to care about anything else. And it's kind of like, yeah, that sounds tempting. Everybody's had those thoughts, and you just don't do it because you know it never ends well, whatever version of it is. So it's
I mean, that's kind of
entertaining to watch somebody and see what happens when they do that.
And that's like the key noir thing, right? It's the fate. It's a tragic flaw. Like he's I guess, I don't know if you call him a sex addict, but he's something like that, where it's like he literally cannot control himself, knows it's a terrible idea, and just sort of jumps off anyways.
But there's also like a couple scenes like where there's this suggestion that like he can't keep up with her, right? And
she's the vamp.
Right. So there's, I mean,
30 seconds. Yeah, that scene.
Yeah, exactly. And like when I mean, now that the more we're talking about this, I don't know why I didn't make this connection until this conversation, specifically about like the levity and the comedic aspects. Is now I'm realizing I kind of had a similar experience when I saw Wild Things for the first time.
Another flowy noir.
But I feel like that's supposed to be, I would argue those are the ones that are the most, I mean, it's a different vibe, but to me, those are my favorite kind of movies, which I feel like a lot of like the neo-noirs, like I feel like a lot of the iconic ones like Bound or even Last Seduction, there's like that there's just elements here and there that it's not like everybody, like a lot of the older noir films, you know, it's like everyone's sometimes like playing it really fucking straight the whole time, you know, everyone's like down and they're spiraling down and it's all very serious. You know, that it's like you get the most out of the movie experience. You're like, shit, I get it all. I get like, some levity. And it also is like a way to like, again, make characters more dynamic, right? Like even that one little Mickey Rourke scene is so fun. And I wouldn't necessarily call it comedy. It's not like comedy, but it's just like that exchange is just so interesting and like fun in a weird way.
Yeah. I mean, presence.
Totally. I mean, and that was his first like real, like, I think, even though it's just a few scenes, it's pretty much like his first meaty role, because The Diner was the next year, and he had like really brief comedic role in 1941 and another really brief role in some forgettable movie in 1980. But then this, it just like it's incredible. Like you get why he became that kind of like magnet later on in the 80s. I think that is a really good testament. And William Hurt too. I mean, it's amazing that you've got all this cast along with Ted Danson, who's perhaps the only one really known for comedy, but everybody's got chops in like that weird, like high, what do you call it? You used the word earlier, Molly, that kind of like heightened universe, right? Where it's like, when William Hurt is like squinting and like delivering these really bad pickup lines, but then also like Kathleen Turner is really like going full Lauren Bacall and trying to really just like glow on screen. I think it makes sense that the movies had such staying power, going all the way to, I mean, you were mentioning, Molly, about this idea of like having somebody ruin your life. Like that's even in like like memes and online language nowadays. Like, I want this person to break my back. I want this person to like choke me to death, right? And it's like you were seeing this.
So those things are so natural coming out of your mouth. It just felt right. Yeah.
I know. I mean, this is a very normal conversation for three platonic friends.
I mean, I'm fine. I terribly enjoy hearing you have to say things like, you know, how the kids are saying, I want someone to break my back, to ruin my. No, I mean, that's what I'm saying. There's like, it's the appeal of the erotic thriller, and like, again, what I think this, because it does, and it doesn't waste a ton of time getting you there in the beginning. Like it takes you on to like, yeah, what if you were just like, let yourself be a dum-dum like William Hurt? Like, what sounds kind of appealing, right?
Yeah.
You know, what if any of us let ourselves just like be a dum-dum and just like, yeah, like just go, just like indulge your primal instinct and just like see where that took you. And again, basically like, you know, there is sort of a, I don't want to say, you know, but there is an element of just like, yeah, I don't even care what happens. Like, I want this so bad, and I'm just going to let myself just give over to that primal desire that, like, I don't care what happens. Like, I don't. It's kind of like a death wish a little bit. Yeah. You know, like, we're just like, I don't care what happens. Let's do this. Let me throw a chair through a window.
So can we talk about, like, what exactly happened when this movie came out in 81? Because it was a modest hit. And it had relatively good reviews, but there was definitely some like clear like line in the sand. I don't know if you want to call it prudishness or
moralist or something.
Yeah. So like one of the most interesting things I noticed, like looking back at the original reviews from 81, is there's always this sparring going on at the New York Times between Vincent Canby, who's like the outgoing old guard, and Janet Maslin, who's incoming. She got the assignment to review Body Heat when it was theatrically released. And so she wrote, sex is all important to Body Heat, as its title may indicate, and beyond that, there isn't much to move the story along or to draw these characters together. A great deal of the distance between the leads can be attributed to the performance of Miss Turner, who looks like the quintessential 40s siren, a call shout out, but sounds like the soap opera actress she is. Miss Turner keeps her chin high in the air, speaks in a perfect monotone, and never seems to move from the position in which Mr. Kasdan has left her. Just like brutal. Pauline Kael also trashed the film, but Vincent Canby like did like a huge like 1,200 word thing when the movie's released on VHS, which the New York Times was definitely not doing at the time. But he seemed to go out of his way to go completely against Maslin. And he wrote, if not in its initial conception, Body Heat is an original in its unexpectedly romantic, lush execution. It's full of extraordinarily rich, leisurely, erotic camera movements, of which the film's first scene is a perfect example. Richard Corliss was also a big pusher for the film. So it seems like there was this kind of dichotomy between the people that really appreciated its craft, its skill, its pushing the envelope, so to speak, in the erotic direction, and the people that, I don't know, do we think it was just like a purely moralist, prudish thing going on, or is there something kind of going back to what you said earlier, Dan, like did people just kind of write it off as derivative, as wooden?
Well, I think the criticism of Turner's acting, I think, is a little bit misplaced, because I think that was a whole put on.
Right.
If I'm wrong, right? Like that was the whole point, that she's supposed to be kind of flat. And that's kind of
to draw Hurt's character in.
Yeah. So yeah, I don't really buy that part of it, but I think initially with a critical response based on what I'm seeing here, yeah, it seems like a kind of line in the sand moralist stand. Maybe like people didn't think it was a good like noir film or something. I don't know, but like that's all changed. Like this movie has what, a 98% Rotten Tomato score now.
Yeah.
77 on Metacritic, 80% Rotten Tomatoes score, 74 on Letterboxd, 74 on IMDb. Those are all super high scores. Metacritic audience score of 86, a Google rating of 79. So essentially, like, however it was sort of depicted back then, you know, obviously it made a big splash. It made like essentially $80 million adjusted to today's money, which doesn't sound like a ton, but it was a small film, right? And it launched the career of Kathleen Turner, launched Kasdan, launched her essentially. He was already sort of a stage actor and had some movies before this, but it definitely enhanced his career. Like a lot of the contemporary reviews are like, well, this puts him on the map. Yeah, this makes him like Robert De Niro level actor, is what I've read at least once from a reviewer. And what I find interesting about that, though, is like, how did that really play out to how people thought it was? Like, did William Hurt become a Robert De Niro or an Al Pacino? No, he didn't. No. He became a very consistent and great character actor. He got nominated, I think, once or twice for an Academy Award later on. Kathleen Turner, I mean, I don't know, like, am I speaking out of turn by saying that, like, I mean, what was probably her biggest film after this, you guys think? I don't even remember. Can't even like think of her film career now.
I mean, I think I'm trying to like race through my brain of all the movies I watched with my mom. Let's look it up.
What was
Kathleen Turner? Kathleen Turner.
Like War of the
Romancing
Roses.
the Stone. Hello,
yeah.
Like so many things. She's
Jewel
great.
of the Nile. Yeah.
And then Kasdan, of course, you know, goes on to make some big films, but I think creatively this is definitely his best film. I find it interesting because it's like,
did you see the Stephen King
also Kathleen Turner then eventually got old, and we know what that means. And then everyone was like, "Oh, you don't look exactly the same as you did in Body Heat." Throw her in the trash.
Oh my God, she was Jessica Rabbit. How did I not know that?
Yeah, I mean, she obviously did like a great role. Like she's in Reversion Suicide. She's fantastic in that.
Oh, that's right.
She won a Tony Award? Oh no, she didn't win a Tony Award. So you have that reaction, sort of like, hey, this is going to be a huge spark for everybody. And like, I think Turner would say yes, but for Hurt and Kasdan, okay. Like, they didn't necessarily live up to sort of that level of extreme hype that came out. But like, the film kind of stands on its own as like a huge influence, right? And nowadays it's sort of seen as a real sort of milestone in neo-noir and the foundation of an entire subgenre. So it's like its stature is kind of like impeccable, I would say. And there's not really, I don't know. I kind of wonder what younger people, let's say under the age of 30, would say when they see this movie. Like, does the explicit sex still stand out? I would say probably yes, because it's so emotionally charged. Kind of what Molly was talking about. Like, it's almost like this fatalistic sexual primalism or something. That really lives on the screen. When you see it, you're like, this is very intense. Get a little hot under the collar. And like, so that, I mean, that's sort of the historical and cultural importance of the film. It's kind of unquestionable. But I mean, I go back to sort of the stuff that, you know, I've been obsessively watching noir films for the last like 2 years straight.
Right. And that kind of like, moralist backlash is all, it's like, I mean, it's kind of history repeating itself, right? Because that was going all back to the way some of these themes were handled in the original wake of noir, and like the code finally dissipating in the 40s and 50s, right?
Yeah.
So like that's part and parcel. That's like part of what makes noir is not just the over topness, not just the, you know, doom and gloom, not just the, you know, melodramatic aspects, but also just like contextually. So I mean, if Molly hasn't already fallen asleep, what do we think is the reason that this kind of gets this subgenre gets a kick in the ass in the earlier part of the Reagan administration?
Yikes. Is that a question for me?
I mean, I'm checking in to make sure you're there, but I'm sure that Dan has a response to that.
Go ahead, Dan.
Go for it, Molly.
Nobody wants to touch it. And
touch
that's a wrap for this episode of
No one wants to touch what?
Well, you got to talk about like she gets away with it, right? Like that's the hugest part. Like,
exactly.
That is the biggest change in sort of the formula. And she gets away with it, and she outsmarts everybody.
So but he made like a movie that's enjoyable for women. Like I don't understand. Like it's just like.
But I think that's the interesting part about that. Like,
yeah.
Well, I mean, think about it like the other way. Like, wouldn't the sort of she gets away with it, so basically she's a sociopath murderer, right?
And so is he.
Yeah, and so is he. But so that we're supposed to celebrate that?
Oh my God. I mean, so
now who's the moralist?
I mean, that's what an interesting part about it, because in a traditional noir, the guy dies at the end, right? Like that's what a noir is at the end of the day. You break the rules.
Is it always?
For the most part.
I mean,
there's a comeuppance, right, that happens.
Right, but it isn't always that you're like, I mean, Long Goodbye, he doesn't die.
True,
yeah.
I mean,
well, they're in Chinatown, but there's sort of like a moral reckoning to what happens, right?
Sure, yeah. I guess I was just clarifying the guy doesn't always die.
Would you put Kathleen Turner in the same role as... That's where it's upended here, because the protagonist is Ned, right? Not Kathleen Turner.
Yeah.
Right. Like, how would you relate Kathleen Turner to, like, let's say, Jack Nicklaus in Chinatown? They're not like the same, right? In the traditional noir, essentially, like, he would find out that the world's mysterious and he's never going to know what's going to happen, and he feels down and dejected. That's a normal noir, or he dies. One of the two. What do we make that, like, the sociopath gets away, kills all these people, and gets her wish, her ambition is, essentially fulfilled? What do you think that is? There any sort of broader meaning to that?
I mean, like maybe. I think
because it did kick off a whole series of movies like this, where the Femme fatale essentially accomplishes what she wants to do and kind of gets away with it. There's no sort of
why can't we get away with it sometimes? That sounds kind of fun.
Yeah, I mean, that's, I guess, that's why I was asking. Is that why it's fun?
No, that's what I'm saying. Like, yeah, yes, and I think my whole point where we like differ a little bit on this is also like, to me, and like the question about, again, erotic thrillers, like there's a fun element to it that I think maybe we differ on that I see, or that's the attraction to the genre, is there's, again, not always, but it's like you get here. Yeah, I don't know. She gets to accomplish her goal. Look at her achieving her high school dreams. And yeah, and like, again, I feel like this whole movie to me is just like fun. And I think like we have this perception of like what is like fun and like pleasurable to watch. It has to sort of like fit a certain category. But I think when you do it right, like, again, like I said, you get humor, you get mystery, you get like sort of like an immersive environment, you get sex, you get like, it's, yeah. Anyways, so I think for me, I don't know. And you guys probably did more like in-depth research to know if like I don't get the impression Lawrence Kasdan was trying to do anything like super subversive. Like I do think the choice obviously is right. So that's what I'm saying. So I think some of your questions are like, am I finding some sort of like broader contextual subversion of cultural norms or something in this movie? Like, no, I think the subversion is more like genre subversion at the end. If you sort of have this attachment to, this is how a noir is supposed to end. But yeah, I mean, I think that's it. Like, I think it makes it a little more fun. I like it adds an element. Like when we talk about like Wild Things or some of these other neo noirs, like that's sort of like a similar vein. It adds an element of like, I don't know. I can think of a better word than fun, but like it adds another like element of enjoyableness to like going through that slog of like, oh, cool, like someone kind of came out on top. Like, yeah, everyone's kind of a shithole. Like, usually in these movies, like, no one...
She says that we're both rotten.
Like, right? Yeah, like, everybody's kind of, like, you know, different shades of dumb and stupid and corrupt in these movies. So it's, at the end of the day, it's a little bit fun to, like, watch somebody kind of, like, get away with part of it, you know?
Yeah.
And I think that now that you're saying this, it's reminding me of that dinner scene, right? Where they run into each other at the restaurant, the three of them, the husband plus our two protagonists, and the husband, Edmund, makes that, you know, crass comment about, like, can't explain these finance things to women, and Maddie, like, does a, like, angry laugh it off kind of reaction, saying, like, oh yeah, because they, you know, can't understand, women can't understand this. And so I mean, I do think that if there's anything, like, social commentary wise going on there, and I do agree that it's largely all genre work and subverting those kinds of tropes, by having her out on top at the end, there's also, like, I think a pretty reasonable argument to be made that that feminism is showing up in mainstream film for the first time.
We have to pay extra for that, so don't get too into.
Oh, okay, that's for the Patreon.
I see some feminism coming. Uh-oh. I spy a feminism.
But I mean, I find that that is one of the things that I think separates perhaps what's going on in Body Heat from, you mentioned Night Moves, which is another Florida noir that happened a few years prior to it, right? But that's like uber masculine, and here we're kind of seeing some more equal footing between those characters, which then lends itself to birthing the whole erotic thriller genre, which is very much about, like, trying to, you know, you have some kind of dopey male archetype that is trying to figure out, you know, just how smart and cunning is this femme fatale, rather than it being the typical old school noir femme fatale, where it's like, yeah, she might deceive you, but she's going to get what's coming to her.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, like, these men kind of, like, you know, deserve to be duped. Not deserve. Well, no, I would say deserve. I don't know. But you know what I mean? I don't know. Like, I feel like that's part of the fun of it, of just, like, yeah, kind of these men are idiots. Like, her husband, like, William Hurt's character, you know, everyone's just kind of like a bunch of dum-dums, like, following each other in a circle. And like, that's the theme of this movie for me. No, but there's, like, an element to, you know, again, especially, like, yeah, subverting that thing where it's like you are given, even though everybody kind of sucks, you're actually given the opportunity, which I don't think a lot of, like, the older films necessarily give you, the way that they write the women, even if you're sort of like, oh, she's so mysterious, or like, oh, this or that. It's, again, it's written with this, like, this way where it doesn't want to leave you with the option to actually root for the femme fatale. And I feel like here they give you that, right? Like, you kind of know she's doing all this stupid shit, but you're like, all right, like, I hope you enjoy your life on the beach at the end. You know what I mean? Where it's just kind of like, it's with like
her 2 dogs and her male lover.
I mean, whatever. Like, it's there's a fun, again, fantasy is the key word here, which you guys always, like, kind of take the wind out of my sails with, like, the fun and the fantasy. No, I mean, just never mind. I shouldn't even say that. I've got plenty.
You know what you're coming into, Molly. This is an hour of stone cold analysis.
Oh God, I know. I'm saying, like, but that's why I was like, this is. I enjoy this type of genre of movie for vastly different reasons than you guys do, but and I would argue is the appeal of it for most people, whether they're analyzing it that way or not. But yeah, it's just, you can. I say the fantasy of too, because you get to play out in this movie. You know, you can kind of choose your own adventure. No one's going to be William Hurt, for sure. But, you know, but maybe you do in the beginning. Maybe you're playing out the fantasy of being William Hurt, where you're just like,
oh, totally.
Yeah, I'm going to just give myself over to this, like, you know, sexy hot lady that I meet at this bar and just let her ruin my life, right? Like, that part of it, obviously not the ending up in jail at the end, but that initial part, you're sort of like, that's part of the appeal and the fantasy and the fun of, like, being in that role and just like, letting yourself give into that. But you can also decide then maybe next time you're going to be Kathleen Turner, right? And you're going to be the one that's like, hey man, for once in my life, I'm going to get ahead. Like, I'm going to like, all these men are kind of idiots, and like men are always trying to scam women. So like, what if I just, scam them for once and live a nice life? And that's fun. And that's like a fun fantasy that you can kind of latch onto, if you want to the second time you watch it or whatever. You could choose your own adventure.
Are there any erotic thrillers in like the last decade? I mean, the genre kind of like had a heyday in the 90s, probably.
Mm-hmm. Online porn. I do. I mean, there's a larger argument there, but I do think that in general, elements of. But no, you know what I'm gonna say?
What's that?
Adrian Lynn. Like, I am so pumped.
What's
Adrian Lynn back after 20 years. Ben Affleck, Anna de Armas, Patricia Highsmith novel. I'm excited for that. I think it's called like I would like Deep Water. Maybe it's some sort of whatever. January, maybe. I don't know. The release date's been pushed like 20 times. But yeah, I think they're still there. I do think that, again, I feel like the last sort of big one, again, which is fascinating because, again, I think we want to dismiss and sort of, again, just like be like, oh, those are whatever. But Body Heat, I think, again, to your point before about like, oh, it has all these high ratings on these nerd sites.
Yeah.
That there's an appreciation like of what a film like that actually is. And I mean, that was a long time ago at this point, probably like 18 years ago. But I mean, like Unfaithful, which was one of Adrian Lynn's like last biggest films. But like that one was like, did Diane Lane like win an Oscar for that? Was she nominated? Like that was like and that was also. Again, and that was a quintessential like erotic thriller. Like everything about it, you give over. You're making poor choices. You're just fully, but you are doing it. And there's danger and there's poor consequences, and maybe they also get away with it at the end. I mean, that one doesn't have the levity elements or like the sort of darker. That's not as that I wouldn't classify that as, but it's the same genre thing. But I think they just don't necessarily. I'm sure it's probably, again, harder in the age of to do a lot of like on-screen nudity or that kind of role. I mean, that's just, I think there's also just maybe not directors that are interested in doing those movies, honestly, besides Adrian Lynn.
At least in America, I think there's more of this. Correct. There's a like Lust Caution is a really good one.
The Handmaiden. Woo!
The Handmaiden, Swimming Pool.
I would argue Handmaiden for me is like the last, like the most recent. I mean, that's really recent too. I feel like 2018 maybe. Handmaiden's like that. Actually, I would include that in my top. That's like a top, like fantastic. That's fantastic movie.
For sure. The other one that comes to mind, I know this is going back a little further in the 2000s, but like In the Cut, Jane Campion. I feel like that was probably the last one where I still had those same kind of vibes, where it was like it was discomforting, but also like you were definitely, there's definitely like this high level heightened fantasy thing going on, even though it's also super dark. But I do think there's moments of levity there too, especially with Mark Ruffalo's character. Anyways, we've long I think gotten through tracing the life of Body Heat. Do you have any final thoughts as our guest of honor, Molly?
Stop.
What do you got for us?
I think I've said all I need to say here. No, I mean in a good way. Like true. I love this movie. I love erotic thrillers. I mean it's my jam.
I like the notion you posited earlier about the choose your own adventure.
Yeah, I brought this up with another one of my favorite non-erotic thriller choose your own adventure movies is The Holiday by Nancy Meyers, which Viper and I recently watched. But I do enjoy movies where, just in general, I mean, it can happen in any genre where it's like you can, and that's an element of like pleasure and fun in whatever genre of like you can sort of tap into the fantasy of a particular storyline or a particular character depending on how you watch it. or, you know, which time you watch it, what mood you're in. I love that.
For sure. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Molly. Next week, are you ready for this, Dan? Our first family-friendly episode, because I have to. I can't not, especially since my own kids are so excited. We're gonna break down the once anticipated and now I think kind of dreaded Disney Plus offering Home Sweet Home Alone for next week's episode of Film Trace.